Fox 8 Local First starts now.
Good evening, I'm Meg Gatto.
And I'm Lauren McCoy. A federal judge rules in favor of the Department of Justice, validating concerns raised by consent decree monitors that the New Orleans Police Department broke provisions of the decree in its investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie.
Lee Zurich's Outside the Office series found Vappie, who's a member of Mayor Cantrell's protection team, spent long hours on and off the clock inside a city-owned apartment with the mayor. David Jones joins us now with more.
Here's why this is important. The consent decree has been in place for well over a decade. It's an agreement between the city and the Department of Justice to implement constitutional policing reforms in the department. But the department's handling of the Vappie investigation was called into question by the Department of Justice through its monitoring team, which found 13 provisions of the consent decree were violated.
Denying that you have a problem is not going to fix it if the problem is still there.
A federal judge, Susie Morgan, issues her ruling after hearing evidence in the Public Integrity Bureau investigation into Officer Jeffrey Vappie, a member of Mayor LaToya Cantrell's security detail. The judge agreed with the Department of Justice and consent decree monitors, who said the internal investigation into Vappie violated 13 provisions of the consent decree.
That sets the court up to impose sanctions against the city of New Orleans.
But Morgan decided to defer sanctions after she was given a remedial action plan by new NOPD Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick. The plan, approved by Kirkpatrick, looks toward reforms at PIB, NOPD's Internal Affairs Unit. Those reforms include drafting or enhancing policies regarding supervisors' roles in misconduct, retraining PIB investigators to ensure proper intake of complaints, enhancing investigators' training regarding circumstantial evidence, and notifying the monitoring team of criminal investigations. Other changes were included in the plan, all focused on complying with the consent decree.
Ann Kirkpatrick just came from a city that's been under a consent decree. She has experience with consent decrees. She recognizes that it's folly to think that you can litigate your way out from under a consent decree.
The PIB investigation was launched after a series of Lee Zurich Outside the Office reports, of which Vappie was a subject. Initially, the city denied any wrongdoing in the investigation, which Morgan's order says was the wrong position to take.
What this signifies is that the city's position with respect to attempting to litigate their way out of the consent decree and denying that they were non-compliant with the consent decree has taken a 180-degree reversal. If there was not an accepted remedial action plan with respect to the Vappie investigation, the city would have been facing potentially severe fines.
The judge had several days of evidence presented to her. She decided that the city's position was wrong.
Ronald Surpass is the former chief of New Orleans Police. He says the report is damaging, but Kirkpatrick's response to it shines a light.
The city's aggressiveness has not been just the Vappie matter. The city has been trying to tell the judge to stay in her lane, but the city's been telling the judge, we'll tell you what your lane is. That's never going to work, and it didn't work yet again.
An NOPD spokesperson said in an email the remedial changes in Kirkpatrick's plan demonstrate a meaningful effort to ensure the issues identified by the court are not replicated. Meg?